Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Philip Barlag, and welcome to the introductory episode of The Greats of History, a new podcast that I hope you will enjoy. For nearly all recorded human history, people have been called great. Many of these people have survived in the collective consciousness and are remembered, even studied. Alexander the Great, Pompey the Great, Catharine the Great. Most everyone knows these names. We may have even learned a little bit about them in school. These are meaningful people, people that have shaped human history. But what does it mean to be great? To be called great? Does it mean that you are good, kind, generous, or wise, cultured and learned, or perhaps victorious in battle, cunning in politics? Can great people be bad? Perhaps their epithets are accurate, or perhaps they are misleading. I suppose it depends on who you ask. Take Alexander the Great, perhaps the most famous person from antiquity. He was an unrivaled military tactician, winning battle after battle, sometimes against impossible odds. He was brave, always leading from the front and the first to charge at his enemies. He was highly educated, reflective, even philosophical. His tutor was Aristotle. Alexander's military campaigns yielded a massive land empire, which, though it did not long survive his premature death at age 32, did spread Hellenic culture across the world. His political descendants emulated him. For hundreds, even thousands of years, leaders have aimed to capture his glory, to connect themselves to him, and to elevate themselves by association. He's remembered far and wide as great. And maybe he was. Or maybe we should ask a Persian. Because if we could ask, say, Persian King Darius III, he might have something different to say. For that matter, Alexander is not remembered terribly fondly in modern Persia. His stunning victories seem more like megalomania, slaughter, and pillage if you or your ancestors were on the receiving end. In fact, my first idea for this podcast actually started with a friend of Persian heritage. I asked her what Persians thought of Alexander, and she narrowed her eyes and uttered a word in Farsi I couldn't begin to know, but I completely understood. There's always another side to the story. And that, my new friends, is what this show is all about. Who were the greats? And were they, or were they not? Now, before we jump into our first episode, I want to tell you a bit more about me and about the podcast. I should get this straight out of the way. I'll admit, I'm more than a little terrified. I've never done anything quite like this before, so I hope you'll be patient with me. I have an astonishing lack of technical proficiency. For example, I'm writing this with no earthly clue how to record, edit, host, publish, and all the fun things that slick podcasters make look so easy, or maybe sound so easy. In getting ready to write and record this series, I went out and asked a lot of people that have experience in this area for their advice. I listened to it, I took notes, I thought things through, and I've decided to more or less ignore it all. You see, today, there's a ton of audio content, and the most consistent piece of advice I got was, do not, under any circumstances, give this away for free. Shop it around, sell it to a content provider, make sure people have to pay for every third or fourth episode, monetize. Honestly, I have no interest in that. Before this series, I wrote and published several books about history, in particular Roman history. Those titles are The Leadership Genius of Julius Caesar, The History of Rome and 12 Buildings, and Evil Roman Emperors. I am glad to have written these books, but the very worst part about writing is selling your writing. It isn't having editors tear into your work. It's asking friends and families and neighbors to buy them. Trying to sell books is the worst part for me about being an author. I just want to write and talk to you and share a common love of history, exploring people both known and unknown. So I'm not asking for anyone to give me anything, but I am asking for you to lend me your ear. If you like this show, please share it. The best possible outcome is that you like it and you tell people about it. As I'm sure you know, these things are judged by whether or not people listen. So if I earn that honor, then I might ask for your help in getting the word out. Another piece of advice that I got on repeat was that I should use AI to help me write these episodes. This is also appreciated, but likewise rejected. Half the fun is learning, digging up sources, resolving the discrepancy between them, pulling back the veil on obscure events from the distant past. It wouldn't be much fun if tech did all the work for me. Now, please know, I am not a historian, at least not in the PhD, doctor, professor kind of way. I study history, I read history, I write about history, I bore my poor friends and family with lots of things that only I seem to find fascinating. But this is not what I do for a living. I just love history, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Maybe it's because I love history so much that I'm going to go back in time to how podcasting was done all the way back a full decade ago, putting it into the world and hoping that people like it, find it, share it. It's just that I'm old school like that. Roll that rap over soul loops like that. Back on topic. I think there are a lot of people out there that we all know we should know more about. People we have heard of, or maybe that we should have heard of, but about whom we know very little. That's part about what we're here to do, to learn together about some of these people, not just any people, great people. Incidentally, it's a bit too bad that this is audio only because I am using air quotes every time I say great. A minute back, I mentioned Alexander the Great. I don't want to get too carried away talking about him so soon. In fact, maybe I've said too much. But don't worry, Alex will get his own time in the sun in a few episodes, so plenty of opportunity to consider his greatness, or not, a bit down the road. To be clear, there are plenty of podcasts, books, articles, etc. that derive great joy in tearing down historical figures. This isn't going to be one of them. The point is that greatness can be subjective. What this series will do is explore some of the people that history remembers as the great. It will consider their lives, their times, their legacies. Along the way, we will consider what it means to be great, to have an impact on history, consciously or unconsciously. After all, they are the greats of history. If they're not worth knowing, then who is? Some of the people this series will explore are well known, others less so. I suspect that some figures will be covered in a single episode, while others will span across several. A lot depends on the availability and the reliability of the sources. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of people that have been called the Great. That's a bit broad for this series, so I've narrowed the list down a bit and chosen the ones that I think each have a unique story, a story that fills in a part of the chronology of human history. Some we will just have to skip. If you're a big fan of Ramon Berenguer III, Count of Barcelona, not incidentally to be confused with Ramon Berenguer III, Count of Provence, both of whom, somewhat bafflingly, were called the Great, then I have some bad news for you. Also, I don't want these things to get too unwieldy, so I may default to a few shorter episodes rather than one big rambling one. When I listen to podcasts, anything approaching an hour feels like it's kind of an audiobook. The episodes are ordered chronologically, with the oldest figures appearing first and the most recent last. As a general rule, the closer we get to modern times, the more well-known our subjects will be. This makes sense. The further back in time we go, the more shadowy people become. Not everyone knows, say, Thutmose III, but pretty much everyone's heard of Catharine the Great. I haven't chosen people based on how well-known they are, and some people might be on the obscure side. But one thing they all have in common, aside from their title of the Great, is that they were hugely impactful in their lifetimes. To understand why these people were so impactful, we will need to look not just at the characters, but also their cultures, civilizations, societies, etc. Context is important, and I need to balance setting the right amount of context with specific focus on the subject of each episode. For example, when we discuss Egyptian pharaohs, two of which are subjects of future episodes, it will be helpful to explore the sweep of Egyptian history that set the stage for, say, Ramses II. At the same time, Egyptian history is almost comically long, and given what prolific builders they were, we have a lot of sources from which to build a narrative. It's tempting to go down rabbit holes. On balance, I try to only go deep on a topic if doing so is important to painting the background picture for the subject of the episode. There's another benefit to this contextualized approach. Taken together, this series will not just be an exploration of the great people from history, or more precisely, the people that history has called great. This series will also dive into many of the great cultures of history. Add it all up, and this series can serve as a kind of incomplete history of the world. You'll meet the Sumerians, Akkadians, the Mitanni, Egyptians, Hittites, Assyrians, Babylonians, Chaldeans, Medes, Persians, Judeans, Israelites, Canaanites, Amorites, Elamites, and that's just in the first few episodes. But it will be incomplete, as, of course, the history of human civilization is long and complex, and as such, there will be plenty of places, people, and cultures that will not be covered. To complicate matters, there are entire great civilizations about which we know very little. For example, the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. It was a contemporary to the great Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations with massive cities, sophisticated engineering, complex societies, etc. And we know almost nothing about it. Not how it was ruled or organized, how it interacted with other civilizations, pretty much nothing. Heck, we didn't even know this massive civilization even existed until about 100 years ago. That's just a quirk of history. There's no way to tell the whole story. Anyone that tells you that they can is lying, either to you or to themselves. By the way, if I'm not a professional historian, then this means that I am definitely not a military historian. Some of the people that history has deemed great have gained this reputation on the battlefield. I personally think the big picture of important battles is interesting and sometimes very important in understanding the essence of a larger-than-life historical figure. However, I don't really get too fired up listening to detailed accounts of battles and tactics and flanks and feints and all that kind of thing. That's probably why I flunk flank. So, hopefully, you're not here to learn about Alexander's detailed battle plan for the Battle of Gaugamela. And if it hasn't quite occurred to you yet, I will definitely be adding in a few obscure pop culture references here and there. Have you caught the two that I've worked in so far? As we approach the greats of history, there are some fascinating dynamics that we will encounter. First, history isn't static. It changes all the time. Even events that people experienced in their own lifetime change with added reflection, shifting circumstances, new evidence, etc. We are always changing, so the past is always changing too. By necessity, any exploration of historical figure is a point-in-time interpretation. Also, some of what we know about the greats of history is skewed by mythologizing. Part of the fun is trying to find our own version of the truth as best we can. Sources can be shaky, and there can be gaps in what we are able to know. There are also contradictions in the sources themselves. For example, in our first episode, we will meet a king who ruled for 55 years, or maybe 56, or possibly 37, but some say 40. Sometimes we just have to do the best we can. By exploring these greats of history, we get to look in on the work of historians. And if there's one thing that is true of historians, it's that they love a good argument. We get to shake our heads and chuckle. At the same time, we need them and their analysis. I don't really want to get in the middle of their squabbling, so sometimes we're going to sneak in, pick a fact or detail, and quietly leave the room. One challenge we'll need to address is just how to balance assessing the actions of people in their own time and in their own values with our more modern way of looking at things. Perhaps what made someone seem great in the distant past made them seem the opposite today. Take Julius Caesar, who is not, incidentally, covered in this series. In his lifetime, he was widely celebrated for his conquest of Gaul. Today, we consider the catastrophic human toll of his conquests, with estimates of between 3 to 9 million Gauls killed as a result of his wars. Many people today see Caesar as vainglorious and genocidal, but he's also a product of his times. How much should modern values change the way that we see past events? I recently posed a related question to a friend. Should we judge someone by the value of their own time or by ours? His response was, we have to judge people by the values of their day, otherwise that belies the notion of progress. I tend to agree. Still, there is a measure of subjectivity to this question that people will need to consider for themselves. And modern considerations are always important, for not only do they help us take a critical eye toward the epochal figures and events of the past, but also such considerations hold up a mirror to us in the present, helping explore ourselves in the process. And what could be more fun than that? Thank you for listening. Join us for episode 1 when we meet the guy who built the very first empire in human history. Hey, that sounds great.